Hello there, my name's Wendy and I'm here to share with you today how I make silk screens using iron-on vinyl. What do I mean by iron-on vinyl? Let me show you. The iron-on vinyl comes on a roll and it has a paper backing on the back because it is sticky. So this one is glossy, and this one, the brand that I've got in Australia, is made by Legacy. This is not a Legacy, this is not the same stuff, but it comes in the same sort of box, or you can buy it on a roll. There's another brand that I'm aware of, which is called Thermoweb. This is the Thermoweb I got, which was actually part of this kit. Slightly matte. This is the vinyl side, and it's matte, but it doesn't matter whether it's gloss or matte. Makes no difference when you're making your silk screen. That's mainly what you need, and you also need some fabric. The fabric needs to be a polyester rather than a nylon. It just needs to be sheer so that when you're doing your silk screening, the paint will go through. So it doesn't really matter what type of material you use, as long as it's polyester, because you need to iron the vinyl onto it fairly warm, so you can't have it cool like you would for nylon. It needs to be able to at least go up to the polyester setting on your iron. So that's why you need a polyester fabric. Polyester curtain, sheer curtain material would do. The very first silk screen I made was this little heart. This is what it prints out like. It's the black bit is what I've cut out of here. And this is what I call a outline. I've later, after I've printed it and heat set the silkscreen ink, I have gone back in with pink and purple paint and painted over it. So the background was not done with silk screening, that was added, that was just painted later. The other type of silk screen you can do is a stencil style. So you cut out the middle part of the silk image, and when you print it you'll just have a solid image like that. And if you do that sort of silk screen, you can also use the bit that you cut out to make a negative or a reverse silk screen. This is the one I showed you that doesn't have duct tape around the edge. You don't need to put duct tape around the edge. I just do that because I like the extra weight, and also so that when it's down I can pick it up easier. But this one, because my material was fraying, I actually put some fray stopper around the edge, but you could just go around the edge with Mod Podge if you'd like. And then when I printed this, I went over the edge to see if that would act as a resist, and it did. So what that means is that instead of using the vinyl, you could actually make silk screens using only Mod Podge. Here's an example of an outline, what I call an outline silk screen, where I've cut it out so that when I print it, you just get the outline, and then I can come back in later and paint or fill it in if I want to. Another example of an outline is this one. I have already painted this one. I printed all the black, and then I did the painting later with fabric paints because I want to stitch it. I've done this on fabric so I can stitch it. When I made this one, you can see, you might be able to see there's little dots there where the paint's come through. That was because I had the iron too hot and I actually burnt the vinyl and it melted a little bit. But what I have since done is I painted over the melted area with Mod Podge, and it filled in all those dots. So now I've been able to print it without any dots coming out. This one also has a couple of little bits of excess paint where I put too much paint on when I was doing the printing. Today I'm going to show you how I'm going to turn this card that I painted into a silkscreen stencil. So you can start with any image, or you can draw one onto the silkscreen paper backing. You don't need to reverse it because the way that you trace it is also the way that you stencil it. So you can put something underneath and you can actually see through the backing. It's fairly transparent. If it's not, then use a light box or pop it up against your window and use that to trace out your design. So I'll just go ahead and trace that all on there, and then I'll come back and show you how I cut it out. So now I've traced the image on here, but I haven't put in all of the details. I decided to leave out the stamens and things in the middle there because I would like to just paint them in later when I do after I've done the silk screening. And I've drawn the stem in, but I'm going to erase that because I don't want to have the stem there. I think if I want to use a stem, I'll be able to paint that in quite easily. But now it gives me the option where I can just pop this onto a lily pad in a pond or something if I want to go that way. And now I just need to cut it out. Now for this one, I want to silk screen the inner part of the petal. So I'm going to cut just inside the line and remove each shape that I want to be printed. I'll leave this part so that it won't print, and that will be where the ink rests while I'm printing. So I'll take that part out. Usually comes out pretty easily, depending upon how well you're cutting. Now because I've got all these parts, I'm going to save them, and as I cut out, I have a piece of fabric handy. I will peel the paper backing off and I will put them down on here. I'll just show you that now. Usually if you just bend the end, it comes off. And I'll just place it on here. Once I've cut out the next piece, I'll go with this one here. Now how much space you leave between the two petals is up to you. I'm going to do fairly thin lines here. And if you accidentally go a bit too far, it doesn't matter. Once you've ironed it onto your material, you can repair it by just putting in a little bit of Mod Podge or some other type of acrylic polymer. So I'll take this one out. Put that on top there. And then I know exactly where the next piece goes. It's handy at this stage to use tweezers if you're going to save all these little bits that you're cutting out. Use tweezers so you can position them exactly the way they should be. But I'm just lining that up with the cutout piece. Pop this one on, and even if it's in the wrong spot, I'll be able to move it later on. I suspect that's too close because I think that's actually touching. So by the time I finish cutting this out, I'll have two silk screens that I can use. I'll just keep cutting this out and I'll come back to you. So now I've finished cutting out my design. I may have done the lines on this one a little bit too thin, but we'll see whether it works when it prints. And I'm ready to put the fabric on this one. And this is the bits that I've cut out, and I've put them on here so I get a different type of silk screen from that one. That one now, if I wanted to, I could just iron it and it would be complete. I'll show you how I attach the fabric. So now I'm just going to peel this off carefully. That worked quite easily. And the way I attach it is I put it down onto a flat table so that the vinyl is completely flat, and then I lay the fabric on top and just smooth it down, and now you can see it's attached and reasonably flat. I'll also show you how I would cut out for an outline of an image. So I'll just pop these away and I'll get that out to show you. I'm just going to show you how I do an outline design. I've drawn on some circles, some are interlocked and some are just floating circles. So I've already cut those ones out. I'm just going to show you how I cut this out so that I just end up with a ring when I print it. Now I draw the outside of each shape, and then because I want to cut these out with different thicknesses of rings when I print it, I've actually drawn an inner cutting line as well. You don't have to do that, but it just makes it easier for me so I don't lose track of where I am when I have a geometric design. I don't do that when I have a different type of design like the water lily I showed you before. So once you've done your design, you need to cut along the very outside edge of the whole design and then take that piece out. Then you take this piece, which would have the vinyl still on it, but I've removed it, and you peel the vinyl off and adhere it to your fabric, because you need that so that you get the outside edge of your when you're printing. You need that to protect the surface from paint. I've also put these little circles that I've cut out, I have since replaced them. I just trimmed a little bit off around the edge and then put them back in place. As you can see, I've trimmed some only a little bit and some a lot more. So I just think it's more interesting for this design to have different sizes. Now this piece, we need to do the same thing, put all those extra shapes back in there. So look at your first shape. I've just numbered them so I know that number 6 goes down that end. So I'll start with number 1. So you need to trim along the edge of your shape so that you've got that shape. And that will go in there like that. If I put it in now, it would just completely fill it in again and you won't actually print anything. So you need to trim it down to shape. So just trim a piece off. As I said, I wanted this one to be a thick outline. Peel the vinyl off. And this is where I find tweezers handy, because I can get them exactly into position. Now I can see that that makes a circle here, which was the original design, so I'll place that down. Now with this one, I need to cut out the entire circle. So I can also trim away that extra piece. Which gives me that ring, but because of where the pieces overlap, this ring overlaps, I need to cut away that section. If you're not sure what to cut away, you can colour in the bits that you're cutting out. You can trim these with a knife if that makes it easier for you. So that will go there, and I'll trim off that little bit of shaded area, and then this piece will be stuck down there. And so you'll see when I print it, I just get this outline of the circles. And once I've done all of this, then we move on to the ironing phase. Now I'm ready to start ironing. I've put a Teflon craft mat on my ironing board to protect it, because when I flip it over the vinyl may stick to the ironing board, and I also have a thinner one to place over the top for ironing. You could probably use baking paper, but I haven't tried that. I've got it glossy side up, and my iron is set to about halfway, which actually is a polyester setting. So I'm just gliding across the top. I'm not actually pressing down because it's just heat that will melt the glue. Doesn't take very long to adhere the front. Then I flip it over to the back, and you can see it's actually sort of not stuck yet. So making sure that the whole back is covered with fabric. I don't need the craft sheet anymore to stop it from sticking. Now you can see here where it started, well, I hope you can see here how it started to stick, and there's a few bubbles. So I just keep on ironing until the majority of those bubbles are gone, because then it means that the glue has melted. And the vinyl is stuck to the fabric. Because I've got it onto a dark craft mat, I can actually see where it's sticking. And I'll wait a few seconds for that to cool down, because it's very hot, and at this stage the vinyl is very soft. You can see when I peel it off how soft it is. So I will place it on a flat surface and let it cool off completely. Once it's cooled off, I'll just trim the fabric to the size of the vinyl, and I'll probably leave this one as it is, but that's when I also put a little bit of duct tape around the edge. So now I'm ready to print. I have a piece of cardboard which I've covered with a little bit of wadding and fabric just to make a padded printing board. You don't have to use one of these, but it makes the prints come out a little easier. I'm also putting in place my craft mat and a piece of fabric that I want to print onto. You can tape it down, but I'm too lazy to do that, so I don't bother. Now I have my water lily design that I'm going to print first. So you need to print on the fabric side. The vinyl side goes face down, because if you print on this side, paint will get caught on the vinyl, or if you're using a credit card or something to spread the paint, that will also drag and get caught. So if you do it on the other side, it'll be very smooth. So I start by applying my paint all over. And because I'm using two colours, I'm trying to swirl them so that they all mix together. Hold it on one side and just press your paint through. Now try not to press too hard initially, because the paint does actually go through quite easily. And because I've got fine lines on this one, I also don't want to have too much go through. So this paint that I've used, the So Soft, has made little bubbles because it's a bit too runny, it's a bit too watery, but it's still worked fine. So now I'll just set that aside to dry and all those little bubbles will go. When you go to do another print, wipe it off with the paper towel so that you don't transfer paint to anything else, but don't use a wet cloth because it will make your next print run. Any water on here will make the next print run. So now I'll show you the circle one that I did. When I make these, this one I went a bit too close to the edge, so I've added the duct tape to make sure that when I'm painting I don't go over the edge of the silk screen, but that's optional. I also like to write front on the fabric side, so I know that when I put it down it's face up. That's the right way to print, and I won't print it on the wrong side. Now this one I'm going to print onto a piece of fabric that I was experimenting with. So you can print over the top of pre-printed fabric. You can even use commercial fabric. I've done that in the past. And this one I'm just using a normal fabric paint. This one's designed for kids and it's quite thick in the bottle, so I'm just squeezing out a lump. And it's gold. When you use metallics, they do tend to stay in your silk screen, so you may get a little bit of metallic coming through on other prints that you do, because sometimes it doesn't all wash out. Now again, I'm not pressing too hard, even though this is quite a thick paint. I can see that it's gone through. I'm pretty sure it has. And there's that circle design. See how it's got thin areas, thin circles and thick circles. Now if I want to print another one, I have to either wait for that to dry, because I'm going to make a mess, or I can grab a piece of paper towel and put it over there and then print the next one. But you do risk smudging it, so I will wait for that to dry, and then I'll do another print. I would also alternate the design, turn it around a bit if I want to do more circles. The next one I'm going to print is this other water lily design that I did from the bits I cut out of the first one. I'm just using scraps of fabric at the moment for my first. Usually when I do my first few prints, I do like to use scraps of fabric, and making sure I can see the word front. Place it down. Now I'm going to print out the other water lily design that I did. This time I'm using Lumiere paints, and I'm just sort of drizzling it on, being careful not to apply too much because this one is quite runny. This one is a little more dried out, so I'll probably just put a few dobs here and there, and we'll see how we go. I've got it facing up the right way, so now I'll just drag it across. Because I'm doing a water lily and it's on water, I'm dragging across so that I get a stripe design, I hope. Again, try not to press too hard. It is just natural that you want to press hard. And it's mostly worked out. Obviously at that spot there I did go a little bit too hard. So one of the things that you can do is just grab a paintbrush and just pick up a little bit of the excess paint from around the edge and just reshape that leaf. So rather than looking like a blob, it looks more like it was meant to be there. Or like this one, you can just fill it in completely. Nobody but you knows that there was a petal there. This one here has sort of filled in, so there's not much I can do about that one, other than to make this go around a little more. And I'm just going to I'm going sideways with my strokes to make it mimic the sideways that I did the printing. It's easy to do a little touch up while the paint's wet, but now I need to go and wash my screen. You need to wash the screens pretty much immediately after you've finished, because you don't want the paint to dry in the screen and then it will be forever blocked and you'll have to go through all that cutting out again. So now I have to just leave it alone, and that's it. I hope you have fun with this technique. I will share with you some of the other designs that I've already made and printed, so you can see how that looks. I just want to show you, I've washed out this screen that I did, and it looks like some of the paint has stayed in here. In fact, it hasn't. All that is staining. It shouldn't affect the way that it prints. I'll just use some screen printing ink for this one, so you can see what that looks like. The screen printing ink is reasonably thick, and I've just got a little bit on here. I'm just going to pull it across. Not quite enough. And there you go, you get a very sharp, crisp image if you use screen printing ink instead of fabric paint. So here are some of the things I've already printed and also painted. This little collection of hearts I did on one piece of fabric, and I was testing out different types of paint to use for both the silk screening, which you can see here I used a runny one and it's a little bobbly, but I don't mind that. And then I've painted them with different colours for the fill. And after that I actually ironed fusible onto the back, and I've cut them out, so now I'll be able to just pop them onto any of my projects. This little sample here, I've actually painted it. I actually did the silk screening with puff paint, and then I painted the background with fabric paint. And a small design like this would make a great card front. And I don't always use silk screen paint or fabric paint. I try anything I have. This one is a very old, shiny, dimensional fabric paint. It actually worked on this print here. It's the black outline, and you probably can't see it. But because it's a shiny fabric paint, the outline here is actually quite glossy looking. So that's another option. This one I showed earlier, and it's just normal bluey green fabric paint with some of the gold mixed in. Some of the gold was applied at the same time. This one is a piece of sun printed material I had that didn't really work out, so I've gone over the top with white screen printing ink. You do get a very crisp image when you use the screen printing ink. And these little swirls here I just painted when I was making the screen. I used the vinyl to block out all these circles and dragonflies, but then I got a paintbrush and dipped it in a little bit of Mod Podge and just did very fine circles and swirls, and you can see how they've actually printed. I was trying to see how fine I could do it and it would still print. So it was a bit of an experiment, but it gives you an option. If you want to, you could actually just paint directly onto your fabric instead of using the vinyl, because it acts as a good resist. I also like to make patterns. Geometric patterns or just random patterns are good for screen prints because you'll probably use it over and over again. This one was all squares and did take quite a while to set out. This section here is the actual size of my screen, and then I've just repeated it. When I repeat it, I usually turn it around so you don't get the two matching. I forgot here, but I did do it on this section. So, and again, I've used a few different colours of paint when I was doing the silk screening. And this is an example of layering your silk screens. I started with a printed fabric, but I used the reverse, so you just see a little bit of white coming through. Then I did the purple background and the previous silk screen that I showed you here with silver paint over the top. The purple background's a little messy because I actually dropped it when I printed it, and I picked it up, I dropped it, so that's why I did the printing over the top. But if I was going to use it, I would probably use little sections of it in my textile art, so that's perfectly fine. This is the screen that I did for the purple background, and all it is strips that I had when I was trimming the vinyl from other designs. I had all these bits of vinyl left over, so I just stuck them all on, and then I added a few big ones and a few random bits here and there. And I also used the vinyl to do a border. So that's a very large one that I will use to print fabrics. But getting back to the original idea, all the brown you see here, other than inside the branches, but the brown outline was the silk screening, and then I've used fabric paints to come in and paint that when the silk screen had been heat set. This example was screen printed with Lumiere paint, which was quite thick. And then I've really watered down the fabric paints so that they're like watercolours, and painted the background and also inside the leaves. You can see the Lumiere has stopped the paint running out. Doesn't always happen, but it makes for a nice effect, a nice soft effect with the fabric painting. You don't need to restrict yourself to fabric. You can also use your screens to print onto paper. And when I do that, I usually use a thick tube acrylic paint. I tried it with the little bottles of acrylic paint, but they're a bit too runny. It needs to be a little bit thicker, so usually that means one of the ones in a tube. It doesn't matter what brand you use. And this is one of the designs that I first did, and I've since, after I printed it and painted it, I've done embroidery on it and then attached it to this fabric journal page. So once you've printed out your designs, you need to do something with them. They make great focal points. If you're doing a pattern silk screen, that could easily be one of these background fabrics. And lastly, I'll just show you the gold design that I did earlier over the top of this one. It changes the look of the fabric. And again, I would probably use small sections of it. So the possibilities with this technique are endless, and I would suggest you get your hands on some iron-on vinyl and have a go. Thanks for watching.